Welcome back to the Fighters Corner podcast for another epi. Today's episode, we invited international superstar Miguel Ituratte. Miguel is very well versed in all things MMA, boxing, and is also a odds specialist. Myself and Mike have known Miguel for years, and he's a highly respected person in the combat sport community who is also a certified G. Trust me when I say he's an endless well of knowledge, and this 45-minute podcast is just a tip of the iceberg with what we're going to start doing with Miguel in future episodes. Anyways, I'll shut up so you can enjoy the podcast. But before you do, I'd like you to subscribe to our podcast, whether you are listening to us on Spotify, Radio Public, SoundCloud, TuneIn, iTunes, and MySpace if it's still around. You can find us on Twitter at Fighters Corner Pod, as well as Instagram and probably MySpace too. Oh, and by the way, we got some perks up on our Patreon as well, so feel free to check that out as well. Let's give a quick shout out to our show sponsor, the United Combat League. If you're in the Midwest and love combat sports, do yourself a favor and check them out. They do cage fights all over the Midwest and are a well-run, organized combat sports, which you don't really find a lot around here. Check them out at uclmma.com for tickets, show information, and even if you want to get in a cage with one of their fighters, I'm sure they will welcome it. So who are you taking in this weekend's fights? I know who I got, and it's not who you think. So I'm going to take my picks over to the world's safest and most trusted online gambling site and make a few bets. That's right, it's betdsi.com. With more than 20 years experience in the online gaming industry, BetDSI has the best sign-up and deposit promotions on the web. They also boast more deposit options than any other betting site, including fast, free, and secure payouts. Also, for our listeners, they are offering a special promotion where you can build a bigger bankroll and get 100% sports cash bonus when using our promo code Fighters Corner, all one word. That's 50% more sports cash by using our promo code Fighters Corner. Check out BetDSI for all your online gaming needs. Lastly, thanks to Johnny Rehab and his esteemed team of attorneys who let us use his music. Johnny Cochran, Gordon Bombay, and even Peter Francis Tracy don't got nothing on these guys. Check them out on SoundCloud, Bandcamp, and Amazon. Thanks again for listening, and on behalf of myself, Mike, and Jonah, enjoy the podcast.
Welcome back to the Fighters Corner. As always, my name is Mike Davis. That has not changed since the last episode.
Thank God.
With me is John Goroski. And John, we have a special guest today due to the fact that Jonah Williams is a punk and decided not to show up. So we've got...
you are right. We have a very special guest today and our very first international guest.
What? So Miguel Ituratte is joining us. He is an international matchmaker. I don't want to get into his background just yet due to the fact that we're going to pretend one day that we haven't spoken, and we're actually going to do an interview with him in regards to his exploits in both boxing and mixed martial arts. International matchmaker, boxing expert.
MMA expert as well.
For sure. And in terms of credibility, adding somebody like this to any podcast, I think kind of puts it through the stratosphere is how I look at it. So welcome, Miguel.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, guys. It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. And, I guess we could stick with the big topics, which means, we're coming off Amir Khan and Terence Crawford and heading into Canelo Alvarez against Daniel Jacobs. So boxing on the big-time level is front and center.
Let's talk about that Amir Khan fight for a little bit. Miguel, how well do you know the male anatomy? I mean, can you tell me the difference between the hip bone and the dick bone? Because Amir Khan doesn't seem to know the difference.
Yeah, he took a lot of heat for that, and I understand what people are saying, and even Terence Crawford accused him of quitting after the fight. And Amir Khan sort of said, I'm not a quitter kind of thing, and, look back at his career. But I think you're going to look back at this as a low moment in his career. I think it was the kind of thing where even if, he's been guilty of this before. His rhetoric to me always sounds, the same. Here again, he goes, in round 6 when, Crawford was already, his face was already mashed up and Crawford was already, well ahead on the cards and stuff. He's telling me, I was starting to land my punches. I was getting my space together. The fight was just about to turn. Maybe I'm not seeing that, but I don't see any of that happening. I think that's just rhetoric and talk, and that's what worries me about Amir Khan. He always gets these delusions after a fight, Well, he should just admit and admit what it was, which is that he fought the best guy in the world. There's no shame in that. He got to the sixth, and he won it out.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Amir Khan's been taking some really hard fights. Like, I'd say his last, 3-4 fights, he not only has not looked good, but he's taken some beatings, but he's towards the tail end of his career. Like, after this, convincing me to buy a pay-per-view with Amir Khan on it, which is one of the foundations of me buying that pay-per-view, depending on who his opponent is, I think it really hurt his stock. His actions. Like, I'd rather have him ride out on his shield, which is obviously not always the easy thing. But, what are you hearing in regards to numbers? Because a lot of times, like, if a fight happens and it's a really good one, there's like a secondary market of people that want to purchase. How has that affected these numbers, Miguel?
Well, the initial numbers aren't that great, and I got to be honest, I expected that. They're about 150 to 200, 200 on the high end, probably closer to 150.
160 was the number that officially came out.
Yeah, okay. So with 150,000 pay-per-view buys,
That's pretty bad.
Here's the thing, and I'm going to draw a correlation to the world of I'm going to draw a correlation to the world of MMA if you'll let me for a little bit. Bellator tried to play this game a long time ago with the UFC and Eddie Alvarez. And Eddie Alvarez had a contract with the UFC with an offer, and that had pay-per-view shares. Mm-hmm. And the pay-per-view shares were the big part of the contract. Alvarez was very interested in making that money, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously everybody would be. So Bellator coyly matched the contract, because what happens there is all they have to say is, we'll give you a percentage of the pay-per-views. But they hadn't done any pay-per-views. Meanwhile, the UFC had a long history of paying their fighters through this method, and they could, fall back on numbers. But here, so my point is when they told Terence Crawford and Amir Khan, your fight's going to be on pay-per-view, it's no longer like the only game in town. So now all of a sudden, were they going to ever break through and get to 600, 700,000 pay-per-views like one of the bigger shows that go out there and stuff? No, because I don't even think that the promotional companies are backing the pay-per-views anymore. Not when you look at, the type of credential and cachet they're giving, ESPN Plus and DAZN and these other, Showtime will be streaming their undercards, in this coming month, they start streaming their undercards before, they distribute on TV still and things like that. But distribution is changing, and getting signed to a pay-per-view in 2019 is like a mixed signal to me. It's like, unless you're Canelo and you've been a guy, and Canelo's not even doing pay-per-view anymore, right? But unless you're a guy who's like a Brock Lesnar in UFC or something like that, where you've already done that and already saw pay-per-views, I think it's a hard sell. And I think, like I said, I think at the end of the day, if they're fighting for pay-per-view shares, that check's going to be a lot smaller than they were thinking about.
I agree with that. It's almost like what we're watching here is like when music started going digital, and like musicians were like, okay, well, the majority of our money is through record sales. Yeah, you're right, but the internet's here now, and everyone's kind of ripping that off. Okay, well, now I got a tour. I like the fight game is absolutely changing in regards to revenue and its streams. DAZN, I mean, they spent over $250 million on Canelo. And I'm not even sure he's worth that much money.
Well, I'll tell you this. I asked myself the same question about Canelo. Is he the guy? I question that as well, put it that way. But the bottom line is this, I think Canelo's going to get his first check from that huge contract now after this fight, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe before the fight and then after. But it's not like they ponied up a $500 million to Canelo up front. it's spread out, so he hasn't gotten paid. He has to, we have to survive the length of 6 fights or 10 fights or whatever it is in order for him to get the payout. And that's what, is going to be interesting to see with the zone, because they continue to make big moves and things like that. And at the end of the day, is that formula going to be the one that has legs for 3, 4, 10 years?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting question. Like, is Canelo Alvarez worth that, and how long is DAZN going to be around? I mean, I think that the reception in regards to the color commentary team and the production, I think it's just been a little spotty. I mean, it's like I've heard people talk about it, and how many people are DAZN? Like, what kind of name is that? How do you? I don't know.
Is it an acronym?
I don't even know. I guess their job, if they've got that much money, their job is to let us know. And you got the pay-per-view right around the corner. And I'm looking at all my social media, and I'm a social media guy. Like, I'm their target audience. Like, if you look at the pages I like or how I interact on social media, I should be targeted. And I haven't seen a single ad for that.
No. Yeah, I agree. I haven't seen anything like that either. Are they banking on just Canelo's name?
I mean, it's, it's just like, well, go get a Big Mac. You want a Big Mac, right?
Yeah,
you kind of know where to find a Big Mac at.
Right. Yeah, it sort of goes along the line of Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. I mean, that was like the biggest heavyweight fight in the last 10 years.
And how many billboards did you see up in the Chicagoland area?
0. I mean, even on social media, you weren't seeing any of that stuff.
Why are they not concentrating on social media the way they should? Because I remember when social media was kind of like, no, everyone's going to be selling through social media, 10 years ago. And I'm sitting here as a local promoter going, yeah, I'm not sold on social media yet. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, today I am sold on social media, as comparatively speaking as to 10 years ago.
And the big dogs aren't.
And it seems like boxing has not kind of transitioned to that yet. Are you noticing that, Miguel, as well?
Well, boxing has a lot of traditions, right? And they're actually doing a good job of breaking out and getting into a new level. You've got Bob Arum still operating there, but, in terms of De La Hoya, and Britain's Eddie Hearn, who's made a very, sort of bombastic crossover into the world scene. You're talking about younger promoters and promoters that are willing to try things with a lot of energy and stuff. And to me, Eddie Hearn is one of the hardest working guys, on the planet in terms of, trying to lift the sport and do what he's doing. You find him in LA for press conferences, and then in London, and then back in Mexico and promoting events. And it's crazy what he does. And he's big on DAZN, so he sees DAZN. And that's what I wanted to say about DAZN. DAZN, it has a nice presentation to it. Hey, we're going to wrap up, and you're going to be able to pay $10 a month to see all the boxing you want.
It's 20.
Now, how does that really look operationally, right? Now, we have seen some great boxing on DAZN. I'm not going to knock that. We're going to see Canelo Alvarez this weekend and things. So for $10 a week, or $10 a month, I think they're giving me a decent product. But I think that's going to be a little hit and miss with some of the customers here, because there were a lot of weeks that I'm sitting there watching, boxing from Italy, and that's not totally as appealing as, world level international boxing. You know what I mean? So they have had a little bit of filler. And then if you look at it, and I think that the boxing people, it behooves them to look at this, is that the zone is very weak on the MMA side. They do not have the UFC, and that kills them, because nothing they present is going to be, they can say they've got the best MMA in the world, but what they're really saying is outside the UFC. You know what I mean? And that says it all in that sport. So when you're looking at, are they carrying the load, and are they already being able to fulfill everything that they've done? They've got a tall order to maintain all that, keep all those contracts up, to add to it, and things like that. So, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, there have been a couple of weekends where we're reviewing the ads. I'm like, fights from Italy, that never happens. Why is that? Oh, it's because they're on the zone. But there's still very regional action. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's hard for a world fan to really say, yeah, I got to watch boxing, and I enjoy it, but I'm not your average Joe who's going to sit there and watch a couple of, Italian middleweights who'll never hit the world scene. You know what I mean?
So, Miguel, where does this money from DAZN come from?
That I don't know. You know, these are mysterious days where people have.
Who's the backer?
Nobody knows.
I'm just going to speak a little. I'm going to speak a little bit about that because I don't know, but we could go back a few years back to the example of the Premier Boxing Champions. They were given a big war chest and they went to war and signed up contracts now. And now they are one of the players that's on the zone, and they 100%. Also have a lot of TV access. And, Premier Boxing Champions is delivering a lot of fights. Yeah. But everybody thought that, hey, if somebody leaves, people will follow, but people were rude to follow. So the Premier Boxing Champions right now sometimes is isolated. This last weekend, I saw, Robert Easter Jr. versus Francis Barthélemy. I'm sorry, these two guys are a little bit of now 4 years into the PBC experiment. Those guys to me are retreads at this point, and they're not totally bringing in fresh talent, and their roster fell a little bit short of something like where, again, by comparing it to the UFC, the PBC didn't get to a 700 fighter roster where they could satisfy fights throughout and stuff like that. They didn't wind up with that, but they're still in the game and they're still a huge player. And people were saying from year one that they would run out of money. So I would look for the zone to competently make an effort of this for a couple of years, but I think in the short term, I'm going to want to see some progress. Locking up Anthony Joshua, the world heavyweight champion in boxing, was that type of progress. Having, Saul Canelo Alvarez, you are locking up the biggest names in boxing. That's good because you're going to have to counteract the fact that you're B class in the MMA world.
Okay, now I agree with that. Like everything you said is very difficult to argue with, but Canelo Alvarez, where is the overwhelming majority of his buys going to come from? What country?
There's something about Cinco de Mayo and certain
You're avoiding it. All right, so he's got to rely on the country of Mexico to carry it. So
and they do love their boxing.
No. Mexico and Mexican Americans. I think you're gonna have an ethnic quality in America that very much are Canelo fans, and I think that if Canelo is, first of all, Canelo's half and half Mexican. He's not like a Pacquiao where the entire country of Mexico, of the Philippines, stops. Mexican boxing is so big and so, many different people that there are people who are not on the Canelo bandwagon. You know what I mean? So you don't command the whole country. And he'd be dead if all he did was command Mexico. The fact is because he's been fighting now and he's been in our mindset, even since the Floyd Mayweather fight, he is an American an institution too. So there's no doubt about it. Fighting on Cinco de Mayo, it's all marketing stuff. But do you have any doubt that fight's in Vegas?
No, right. And another thing is, like, when you look at boxing in like the 20s and 30s, the big boxing day was the 4th of July. Mm-hmm. And now, like, that 4th of July, like when, what would you say? Like the big Cinco de Mayo was it Mayweather and De La Hoya was like the first real big kind of coming out party for that date. Am I correct?
You caught me with a little. I'd like to answer that accurately, and I don't know for sure, but you might be right.
Okay, I can tell you why.
On May 4th, it was long considered Mayweather's Day, even though it was Mexican Independence Day, obviously, right?
So the reason I said that was because I recall where I was when De La Hoya fought Mayweather, and we were in New Jersey for an Abu Dhabi. I think we were in Trent, New Jersey, and I remember like I got out that night and watched it. I remember, wow, like Cinco de Mayo, this is kind of like a real big deal, and yada yada yada. And it was because I was working for you, Miguel, out there, and I remember that was like, wow, like the first big boxing on Cinco de Mayo. And there was a couple years where it was a little bit of a lull, but now it's like every year this is the big day, and people kind of fighting for that real estate.
Yeah, I remember
that.
I was gonna say I remember the speaking of the De La Hoya Mayweather fight, that memory that triggers in my head about that fight is synonymous with me turning in my fan card for boxing. When De La Hoya got screwed that night against Mayweather, I think that's probably when I stopped boxing in that era, and then it started to pick up again in the mid to late, maybe 2010, 2011.
I agree with you.
I mean, I was bitter about, and then that's the one thing, like, when you said Mayweather and De La Hoya, I'm like, yeah, that's the last time I pretty much watched boxing when I was a teenager.
Yeah, not only that, like, I thought there was a couple times where Floyd was so aggressive on his defense. I thought his glove touched the canvas on one occasion.
Yeah, I seen that.
Yeah, and that's a standing 8 count.
Yeah, I should have been right.
You know, I remember I was with Josh Barnett, and we're driving back, and Barnett's talking about it, and I said, man, I kind of got an issue with it. I said, I think there was definitely one time, possibly 2 times, that Mayweather's glove touched the canvas, and he's just like, all right, well, what does that mean? I go, that's an automatic standing 8 count.
Right. Yeah, speaking of Mexican-American boxers, we got another one that just came up, and he's getting the main event versus Anthony Joshua. You hear about this one, Miguel, yet, or what? Andy Ruiz?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's 100% official, but they've been talking to Andy Ruiz Jr. and Michael Hunter about replacing Anthony Joshua, and Ruiz Jr. was positioning himself and answering questions in the media like he had the fight today.
Yeah,
so
it feels like it's happening.
It looks, if that's the way they're going to go, that's an interesting choice.
well, here, we'll elaborate on why do you think that's an interesting choice? I mean, compared to what else that's out there, what else would you have done? You're not going to get two non-Americans to fight in. Well, what do they fight in Madison Square Garden, right? Joshua and whoever his opponent is. I mean, you're not going to get 2 guys.
I might play devil's advocate to that. The bottom line is they've already sold 15,000 tickets, and it is Anthony Joshua. I don't know if bringing in a solid British rival and introducing a second member of that deep pool of talent by Eddie Hearn wasn't the right move, especially because Michael Hunter doesn't move anybody's radar, and neither does Andy Ruiz. Andy Ruiz is, he's fought a credible fight against Joseph Parker. I think he's mistaken in his feeling that he won that fight. I think that idea that he won the fight with Parker, which was a WBO world title fight, that Parker would eventually lose his world title to Anthony Joshua, right? But just to be clear for the people, but the bottom line is there's some people in New Zealand where Parker is from who say, oh, no, Andy Ruiz won that fight. And that gives him a little bit of credence and things. And I think, oh, that's misplaced. He didn't win that fight. So we're talking about an average or an average contender, so to speak. Then there's the fact that, man, Andy Ruiz sometimes gets caught up with buffets and he likes the all-you-can-eat type. And,
you're
when
saying
you look
Golden
at Anthony
Corral.
Joshua and you want to put an opponent in front of him, I think there is sort of a measuring stick of wanting him to look good, and Ruiz doesn't move that. And I think that for a casual fan, that may be something that plays into it. And then, God forbid, the truth is I think Ruiz is actually a very good, hardworking fighter if his head is together. The problem has been his head. He's gotten off track. He's with the premier boxing champions now, which means that Eddie Hearn will have to come to an agreement with them and get that figured out. And then how do you distribute it on DAZN, or is it distributed on Showtime, where the premier boxing champions tends to be? So they got to get all that figured out. If they get all that figured out, Ruiz is going to walk in and he's still going to be a huge underdog, and nobody's going to expect him to win. And should he break through, we have a Cinderella story, and he gets rushed right into a rematch with Joshua. Right. So,
and he's young too.
I like Andy Ruiz. I think he's actually the best fighter available. But with those other factors, I think he's trying to present the world the heavyweight champion of the world, and not just for a first time. I think he's trying to, establish legacy with Anthony Joshua. And by him, I'm talking about Eddie Hearn and the promotion. So I think the choice of an American in this case was hit and miss. I think they were already in a situation where they can't be optimal.
Yeah. Why don't you think that Luis Ortiz took the fight?
And why wouldn't they put that fight in Europe? I mean, if it's Anthony Joshua.
No, Joshua wants to create an establishment in the United States now.
They keep playing games between him and Deontay Wilder, like trying to build it. One of those guys is going to get knocked out, and then we're never going to get that fight.
I know. I've been saying that a lot lately.
With Luis Ortiz, I think you're talking about a guy who's Cuban. And when you get the Cubans, and this has almost been like something that you could say as a generalization on all of them, they all come with their elite amateur backgrounds and some privileges on the island that brings you. Okay. And guess what? Just being a good boxer doesn't get you privileges anymore. Not in negotiations, not in any of that. Right? So, you can ask for $10 million for a $5 million fight. So yeah, Luis Ortiz may have been too smart for his own good. I don't think he expected the negotiations to go so shortly. But yeah, I think he was trying to maybe ham it up a little bit, and maybe he wasn't ready for the fight.
Well,
but
the way how I seen it, Miguel, I seen that Luis Ortiz, he fought Deontay Wilder almost 2 years ago for one title, and he got $500,000 for it. And by the way, do you happen to know how old Luis Ortiz is? He's got to be in close to 40, right? I mean,
yeah. Right now, I think he's clocking in officially at 39.
Okay,
and
so
there's always been question because again, I think Cuban national and a guy from the teams.
So
who knows? There could be typos on their passports.
He doesn't have much sand in his hourglass left. So I'm thinking like, okay, if he took $500,000 from the Deontay Wilder fight, why not take the $5 million and also 4 belts on the line versus Anthony Joshua? He's not going to get another payday like this or another payday option like this probably for the rest of his pro boxing career. The only reason why I think he didn't take that fight is I think he knew that he might have pissed hot. That's the only reason why I think he did not take that fight. With this short notice and the age that he's at, I think the only reason why he did not take that fight is because he knew that he would have not pissed clean.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of strong points in what you're saying. The bottom line is he didn't take the fight, and it was there. Money, I don't know, $5 million doesn't sound like an insulting offer. That was the number that was out there when Jerome Miller fell apart. I believe that was the number he was scheduled to get. So it's not like it was a known quantity, and yeah, so you may very well be right. And the bottom line is you're talking about an older athlete, and he's not going to have a full training camp. And he may say, I ain't doing that without a full training camp. And, that may have been enough to let $5 million go by the wayside. I don't know.
I'm going to make an argument here. All right, you say he's not going to get that payday again in his career.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Not a $5 million payday.
Klitschko is talking about making a comeback. Okay. There's really not a lot of heavyweights in boxing right now. He might not get $5 million, but he's going to get close. He's got at least 1 or 2 paydays left in him.
See, I don't know. I mean, like, I think that the heavyweight division is a little bit deeper than most people think.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And Klitschko, when he comes back in, I mean, is it going to be on his terms? Is it going to be
here? I know I can beat Klitschko. Just we need USADA testing.
Because
the guy's fought in Germany, for 10 years or 20 years, I should say. Yeah. Where he knows the doctors and stuff like that, to where you're getting drug tested, but Klitschko's really not.
He had Grigory Romachenko in his corner, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. So anyways, speaking of odds on boxing, like let's say hypothetically, let's assume at this point Andy Ruiz does get the bout against Anthony Joshua. Miguel, what do you think that line would look like?
Probably, I'm looking at Ruiz at maybe plus 1,000, plus 950, and what that means is that he would be a heavy underdog, and that means that for $1,000, or rather for a $100 bet, you would win $950 or $1,000. What that means on the flip side, I think it's probably something like a minus 1350 line for Joshua, which means you have to bet $1,350 to win $100.
Yeah.
So, money will come in on Joshua at that rate because it is Joshua, but that is, that's a lot of risk for reward, and that indicates a heavy favorite, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I think he has to be respected, in my opinion. I mean, for his size, he's still one of the hardest hitting heavyweights in the division, in my opinion, and he's pretty fast.
If this were like the early to mid '90s, this guy, he'd be on the sauce. No one would be testing him. He'd look phenomenal, and he'd be a top 3 heavyweight.
Ruiz?
Yeah,
probably.
Probably. I mean, it's just the eye test is where he has issues.
I mean, even when he went up
or he'd be another John Ruiz.
Right?
Yeah, there you go. I mean, even when he fought...
you know what I mean? So this is why I think at the end of the day he will get the fight and with Joshua, I still think you're talking about a guy who's developing, and they don't want to appear cautious. They don't want to send the wrong messages, but they do have to be cautious. And at the end of the day, Jarrell Miller was a 300-pounder, a butterball-y type of fighter And in Ruiz, he's smaller than 300 pounds. God forbid he should come in at 300 pounds. But, you know what I mean? He's going to come in smaller, but I think that you can make some correlations maybe between body types and physicality, and maybe even in boxing style that helped him earn the fight over a guy like Hunter, who maybe, you know, as a cruiserweight coming up, would have brought some different wrinkles.
Gotcha. And then I know we weren't too far from that last Lomachenko fight. What'd you think about that with him? And he was on the same card as Teofimo Lopez. I thought that, do you think that we can see a possibility between them two, Lomachenko and Teofimo Lopez?
Teofimo Lopez would love that, right?
Yeah, he would.
You know, here's the way that goes to me. They're both under Bob Arum's stable, and it's all going to depend on what Bob wants. I think Bob's got maybe some different visions. They're going to have to talk. You know, Teofimo, I think, is still going to have to talk his way into that fight with Lomachenko right now. At the end of the day, Teofimo Lopez is a guy who Bob Arum signed at the Olympics, the 2016 Olympics, where he got Michael Conlon, where he got Shakur Stevenson, where he went and signed a great deal of talent. And this is one of them. And this kid wasn't on the American team. He was on the Honduran team, and he didn't even come close to medaling. So, you know, when it comes down to it, he was one of the guys that signed. Now, as a pro, he's exploded, and he's ahead of Shakur Stevenson and even probably Michael Conlon in terms of what he's done in the ring. Those other guys, though, are already bigger draws, and, you know, it's just going to depend on how Bob Arum tries to manage it. Teofimo's going to have to do some more work in order to get himself into big fights. That's what I see. He's going to have to be a workhorse because he didn't come up with the cherry position. If you think about his background, he didn't make the American team, so he went and represented his Honduras. You know, that indicates there are guys on that level. So, you know, keep looking.
Okay. All right. I mean, like, that's... Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, that's all probable. I mean, Lomachenko, I think he's got his eyes still yet on...
I think he's fighting June 8th in Madison Square Garden.
Well, I know he wants Mikey Garcia. All right, like, if I were to say Earl Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford, or Mayweather versus Pac-Man, or Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder,
or Sean Porter versus Pac-Man.
Yeah, which one?
That's being floated.
What do you think out of those matches?
Where's the money?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, where's the money at, Miguel?
Yeah.
You always go to, well, right now you talked about the depth of the heavyweight division. And I was going to say you always go to the heavyweight division. But in this case, right now, we have a heavyweight division dominated by three guys. If you say Joshua, Wilder, or Fury, that's where the money is.
Yeah.
And I think Fury, in some ways, may be the biggest draw of all.
I agree with that.
You know what, man? I bought a T-shirt. I saw him fight Deontay. I'm like, man, I got a Gypsy King T-shirt, man.
Yeah, he's legit. I did.
You
enjoy
know, I
watching
mean,
him fight.
at the end of the day, he's got a little bit of a different type. You know, I mean, he's different. He's different. The Americans haven't seen somebody like him. I've been watching him for a long time, and there's some things that, you know, that are bawdy or whatever, British and stuff, that I don't know that they'll go over here. I know that, you know, when he fought in Madison Square Garden the first time and got dropped before winning, you know, that he didn't get over with the American media and fans, and nobody talked about, wow, this bombastic guy that we just left. They were like, hey, you know, he was average, he was a big mouth, and that's what it was. So as long as he keeps winning and he keeps being compelling, I think he's the top storyteller in the game.
Yeah, I agree. I
do
agree.
And, you know, I think his interviews too, they're so bizarre, and his antics are so weird, and they kind of they make you uncomfortable. But like his brutal honesty, you know, in regards to like what he's dealing with, and he talks about like drug use and gaining weight and having mental problems. Like normally that would like hurt somebody, you know, like the things that he admits just and is just.
Well, it has hurt him.
Well, I'm not sure it has. I mean, his fight against Deontay.
Let me mention to you a little bit of details, and it's one of the things that came up even when he sort of gave up the belts and stuff. I'll say it in the exact words that I heard it, even though, you know, a detail here or there or whatever. But he beat Vladimir Klitschko, not Anthony Joshua. It was him that beat Vladimir Klitschko, and he couldn't get a water sponsor.
How about that?
After that victory.
Jeez.
Meanwhile, I walk around in the mall in Costa Rica and I see Anthony Joshua in the Under Armour store here.
Wow.
So there was something about his being a traveler and things like that didn't instantly translate into the paydays that he's thinking. I think that was a lot of the downfall. It's like, how can I not be getting the reward that so obviously come to the guy that beat Vladimir Klitschko?
I think, like he's a proud traveler. He's just not a traveler, he's a proud traveler. In Europe, that's looked down upon. I mean, let's just put it out there. So now you're going to sit here and say, well, Manny Pacquiao carries all the guys from the Philippines. The people from the Philippines. He shuts the country down, like we've already discussed. Like, he really caters to that market. Well, there is a giant traveler gypsy market all over Europe. And for him not to cater to that, or to say, well, we're going to be sponsoring people, but we don't really want to be associated with that market. It's complete and total BS.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a giant group of people that he's catering to and reaching out from there, like John and I and yourself, Miguel. I'm a fan of the guy. I'm a fan of what he does and his interviews, his brutal honesty.
It's hard to not root
for him. Yeah, I mean, like we were watching the Deontay Wilder Fury fight, and I mean, obviously this is an old fight, and we're not trying to go down these little rabbit holes here and go. Or I shouldn't say it. I prefer to go down a rabbit hole rather than go down in a million different directions. But man, I walked away from that fight going, man, this guy's awesome. He's somebody special. Mm-hmm. He's somebody special.
He doesn't pass the eye test, but he sure as shit passed that boxing match against Deontay Wilder, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was great. Well, all right. Well, I mean, in essence, we got Canelo Alvarez coming up. We got Lomachenko coming up June 8th. Is there any other fights on the horizon that interest you before we wrap this up?
Well, here, Miguel, let me ask you, what are the odds?
Well, obviously, you got Anthony Joshua, right?
Anthony Joshua, right.
Right. What are the odds coming up with Canelo and Daniel Jacobs?
Well, we can review the odds right now if you want.
Sure, let's go.
Right now we'll call it the start of fight week, and I've been looking at these odds for about 2 months, so they've been up. And, Jacobs has been the steady underdog the whole fight, and he opened at around plus 250, and that's gone up to about plus 365. And again, that means as an underdog, you're betting $100 to win the number that I'm talking about with the plus.
Great, right? If he wins,
plus 275, $100 bet gets you $275 win if Jacobs is able to pull off the win. Money's been coming in on Canelo, and Canelo was at minus 360 as an opener, which means you have to bet $360 to win 100.
Right. But
so Canelo, the favorite, and right now he's at minus 465. So to win that same 100, you got to bet $465 now because of the money that's been coming in on him. So
it's even growing in
that's what we're looking at here. Obviously, to me, I don't know. I usually like to wait till fight day until see the weigh-ins and that sort of stuff before actually placing a bet. But at this point, I don't know. If you are strongly trying to come in on Canelo, that money may just keep coming in all weekend and stuff, so you may as well try to get the best number you can now. But I usually wait till after the weigh.
Don't the fan bases sort of have something to do with the movement on the line as well, like especially after it's been published? I mean, when you said Canelo, the movement on Canelo's line, I immediately assumed that came from just his fans and the people that are supporting him and all the movement behind him. Because I think, honestly, in this world that we live in, there are more Canelo fans than Daniel Jacob fans, right or wrong? I mean, is that how it works? And
sure. I agree with you. I think that the money that's come in is money that was expected to come in on Canelo. He's the A side. Jacobs is making a jump here. Jacobs does have a fight with Golovkin under his belt that would qualify as a fight of this high profile, but it's not. He wasn't making the money he's making. It's not going to have that many eyes. It didn't have the eyes this one will have. This is a much bigger fight. So yeah, I agree with that. Jacobs, to me, is a guy who could be a great story. He's a cancer survivor who went on to become a world champion, and I think that in today's world, that's the kind of victory that needs to be applauded and recognized and not poo-pooed. But more than that, he's really in a situation where he could give Canelo some trouble here from a boxing perspective. A lot of people have talked about this, and it could go either way when they start the fight. But he's longer and taller. He's got good legs, and he could, provide a lot of motion and be in and out on Canelo. And Canelo's had trouble with guys he has to chase down.
Like Amir Khan gave Canelo issues. The first few rounds, you could argue that Khan won. Because of
I think he was up on the card.
Absolutely. So no, that's interesting. It's not a foolish bet, I think.
No, and what I like about Jacobs so far in the build-up, and this is why I like to wait till weigh-in day, but so far, I think he's handled the bigness of the event, and I think that's important too, because if it's your first time there, you have a tendency to be the rube looking up at the buildings in New York City the first time. You know what I mean? This isn't quite his first rodeo, and even if it is the first fight of this size and magnitude for him, I think he's handled it great. And I think, he was at the point in his career where he really did need this. So I think we're getting a very good version of Jacobs for this fight.
Yeah, I'm going to give my prediction real quick on this fight, because this might be the last podcast that we publish before the fight airs. But I think that Canelo... I know that Daniel Jacobs is a little bit of a taller guy, longer guy, but so was Rocky Feldman, and it looked like Canelo had no problem just beating the shit out of his ribs. So I think that Canelo wins it. I think he grinds out like 6, 7, 8 rounds, and I think he's going to win the later half of that fight.
So he's not really known for his strong cardio.
I think this is where he gets it, though. In this fight, I think this is where it happens.
Okay,
that's my feeling. But
okay, man, I'll tell you this right now. If I got disposable income, I'm not saying that this would be the fight that I'd throw it on, in terms of an upset for Danny Jacobs. But it's not entirely possible to rule out.
No.
We're not looking at the Anthony Joshua fight, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's a lot closer.
If Danny Jacobs, like Miguel said, cancer survivor, a guy that's risen to the occasion, every once in a while you get a guy, and that's his night to shine. It happens that this is their night. And, I can honestly say that I'm not ruling Jacobs out. It's a fight that I'd like to watch. So with that, Miguel Ituratte, we sincerely appreciate you coming on to talk about boxing.
Yeah, Miguel, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. Thank you much, man. Take care.
Thank you very much, guys.